Welcome to the Little Sparks Podcast, your home for all things faith and music. I'm Cecilia.
And I'm Tara.
And we're former college roommates, professional musicians, and co-founders of the Hildegard Collective, a space for Catholic musicians to connect with one another and grow in their faith and profession. This podcast is an outreach of the collective, so if you're interested at all in Catholicism, music, or both, this is the podcast for you. Join us each week as we get real, share stories, and learn from other awesome Catholic musicians. We're all little sparks of God's divine creation, so together, let's ignite the world for Christ. Welcome back to another episode of the Little Sparks Podcast. Today, we're going to be sort of continuing a little bit our conversation from last week, which if you did not tune in last week, we chatted about just how the Christmas season is very, very busy for musicians in particular. And, some tangible, practical steps that we can take to taking things off of our plate now here in November before everything really hits in December. So we're going to continue a little, continue so much as spin off from that conversation that we had last week and chat about another issue that many musicians often face in the Christmas season, and that is loneliness. So Tara, this was your idea for an episode. Do you want to kick us off with some initial thoughts?
Yeah, I think loneliness is endemic in our society in general, right? It is such a problem. I think we know this. We see evidence of this left, right, and center all over our world. But I think especially as we approach the holiday season, Christmas, New Year's, that feeling can be exacerbated for a lot of people. And I think especially musicians are in quite a unique position when it comes to this topic, because we often have schedules that directly conflict with family and friends. Oftentimes we are traveling, sometimes very far away from people that we know and love around this time of year for work. And a lot of the public holidays that most people have off of work and are spending time with their family and with their friends, musicians are often working the craziest hours during those exact days. So I think a combination of these factors, as well as a number of others that can affect people on like an individual basis, make this topic particularly relevant during this time. And I think it's really important to talk about because I don't think there's a worse feeling in the world than feeling alone. And I think it is so damaging to our spirit to feel that heavy, heavy cross of loneliness. And so I thought it would be really important to just take some time today to address this often taboo kind of topic, bring it to light, and share some ways that we can combat this feeling, because it can be so crippling. And it is a time, this Christmas season is a time when we should be feeling uplifted and joyful and excited about the coming of our Savior. And to be struck with this scourge of loneliness at this time in particular, I think is really, really difficult. So I just thought it would be a good kind of spin-off maybe of like what we talked about last week, and an important topic to address just in general.
Yeah, absolutely. Something that came to mind while you were, talking about all of that is it can almost seem counterintuitive, this idea of loneliness within musicians at the holiday season, because we're all rehearsing together and we're all, doing all these things together, but it's all work related. And it can be very hard sometimes, I think, to see friends and families having, these wonderful holiday parties and, doing festive traditions that we might just not be able to get to because we're in the middle of rehearsal, or, it's the sixth straight night of doing the Nutcracker, or, things like that. Or I think especially for church music directors in particular, that this can be a very difficult time of year. And I feel like there are a couple different types of loneliness. There's the loneliness when you really are like alone. You're not with anybody at all physically. There's that physical loneliness, but there's also like an emotional loneliness. And I feel like that's the one that a lot of musicians can really fall into during this time of year, because like physically we might not be lonely, but emotionally we are. Um, and church music directors, I think in particular, have a hard time with this, or can be susceptible to this, because um, there is so much that goes into planning the music for all of the services, all of the masses, um, and you have to be there too. Like you generally can't just check out, have other people doing it. You're usually involved in at least most, if not all of those, to some degree. And that can be really hard. Like, when are you going to open presents with your family then? How does that impact your own family as well? And it can be sad to be, at all of the masses all Christmas morning while your family's at home, eating cinnamon rolls and drinking hot chocolate and feasting on cookies and waiting for you to come home. So I think that it can be really tricky. Because on the one hand, like, there's a deep beauty to what we get to do at the holiday season with music, and that's bring joy to a lot of people, whether it's through, performances of the Nutcracker or Christmas concerts, or, um, you know, making the music at Mass just so beautiful and festive and celebratory. We add a lot of joy to people's Christmas seasons. And sometimes we can throw ourselves so much into it, I think, that we end up getting the short end of the stick, so to speak.
Mm.
You know,
Yeah, I think that's a really important distinction, especially about the different kinds of loneliness as well, because I can think of, even in my own life, like a couple of examples. Like this past week for me, for example, was extremely busy with rehearsals and performances. And I was with my musician friends almost every night this past week. And I love them. I adore them. I genuinely love spending time with them. I love their company. However, most of them do not think or believe the same things that I do. And some of them can be quite irreverent and quite disrespectful about the Christmas season and what this means to people who are faithful Christians. So it makes it a bit difficult to connect in that way with these people that I am going to spend so much time with for the next couple weeks and months. And so that really contributes to that sense of loneliness if you're surrounded by people who don't share your values, especially during the Christmas season when, this is all about the coming of Christ and the birth of Christ. And if you're surrounded by people who don't believe in that, or only believe in bits and pieces of the nativity story, and are either quietly skeptical or openly irreverent about it, it is really isolating and really lonely. And it can make you feel really disconnected from these people who sometimes are your only source of company during this really family oriented time. So that can be really difficult. And the other thing is, when you're surrounded during the Christmas season by musicians all the time, as you said, Cecilia, it is work. And usually, once you have finished a particular gig or a particular rehearsal with a group of people, everybody is scattering off in different directions to go to another rehearsal or another performance, or to go home and just get a few hours of sleep before they have to be up early for their next thing in the morning. And so, again, this past week that I spent with all of my musician friends here in Ireland, there really was not much time to socialize and actually be together and pour into one another, because everybody was so busy. that we would finish a rehearsal and everybody would just say goodbye and scatter, and we'd finish a gig and we would just have to leave and go home. I think it could be difficult for non-musicians to understand that part of our lives, because even though we may be with people fairly frequently for performances and rehearsals, that does not mean that we are being poured into or having the opportunity to pour into other people the way that we would want to around
Oh
this
yeah.
this Christmas time. So that doesn't necessarily make it always as fulfilling as like being with your family and your close friends like during this season. So I feel like that's like really important for people to remember, and something I really wish non-musicians understood better.
Yeah. Well, actually, and just to spin off of that, even the times that we do get to spend with family, sometimes not all of us have understanding families of what we do, and that can
Mm.
contribute to emotional loneliness as well. I mean, I'm sure we all have a relative who is like, oh, I can't believe you went down the music path. Like, are you broke? And like, or making jokes about, being a broke musician, or like, oh, if you're single, like, oh, you better marry someone rich, or like, whatever that might be.
Still doing the music thing, are ya?
Yep, exactly. Like, yes, no, and I'm quite successful at it, Uncle so and so. So I think that's also something that can come up a lot, especially at these family gatherings, and you actually do get to make it to, to see your family. You can, depending on the family that you come from, you may be met with a lack of understanding towards what you do, which can be hard. And you can only explain things so many times before you want to lose your mind. Um, and so many years in a row of just like, I told you all about what I do last year, and you were like, oh, wow, you do make a living off of that. And now you're back with the same old jokes this year. You know what I mean? Like, um, so I feel like I was always very blessed because, I came from a family of musicians. Both of my parents are musicians, and their families were very like understanding of what they did. Granted, like the arts are very valued on both sides of my mom and my dad's side of the family, both. Um, but I know for a fact that, my case seemed to be more of an outlier, just especially based off of like conversations I would have with friends in college and grad school of like, how was the holidays? How was your break? And, just, I felt like I would always encounter at least one, usually more stories of like, oh my gosh, if my aunt says one more thing about,
Yeah, yeah.
so, and that can be hard. That can be hard to deal with, I think. And it's hard because the issue of like family not understanding what you do and even making fun of it can be difficult because it's like, on the one hand, it can, make you feel just, either annoyed or bad about yourself or like whatever that might be. But on the other hand, it can also be, depending on the situation, a chance to practice patience and compassion as well, and that's something we do have to remember as Catholics. That when, if people are being harmless about something, like it's not like, abusive or anything like that. If it's more like just a misunderstanding, like, or an unwillingness to see, um, another point of view, we do have the responsibility to practice patience and compassion, especially if we only see these people, a couple times a year. Like we can have some patience for our, great aunt or our grandparent who just is totally clueless about what we do. Um, and that doesn't mean we can't, try ways to make them see, what you do is important and good and, helpful for society. And like, you are making a living off of it. That's, not to like put any of that aside, but it is a chance to practice patience. It is a chance to practice compassion. And I think that's important as well.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I think kind of knowing when to choose your battles, like, you know, your family best, like that. I think there are times and relationships that will allow you to maybe take an opportunity to really explain something to someone, or maybe if like one of your relatives is clearly trying to be funny and make a joke, just like make a joke back. I'm really bad at that one. I do not have a very quick sense of humor. um but if you do, like, just like one back, you know, have a bit of banter in the family. But then there are definitely also times where if there is just a habitual unwillingness to understand, you just might have to let it go. And that's really hard. It's really annoying. And the other thing that I will say about this family not understanding situation, if you are, and I cannot stress this enough, if you are working in music around the holiday season and you finally have an opportunity to go and be with your loved ones and be with your family and celebrate Christmas, the last thing you want to do at your family party is get up and perform for your family. Stop asking us to do it. It is so frustrating. If you would like to hear me sing, come to a mass when I'm singing. Come to one of my 17 Christmas concerts in a 2-week period. There are so many opportunities for family and friends to support the musicians in their lives without making them get up and sing at a family Christmas party. Please,
100%.
please make it stop.
Just send an email out to like all of your family members before the holiday season begins and just say, you know, if you want to hear me perform, here are all of the dates and all of the locations. And if there's admission, this is what it is. There you go. That's
Yeah,
it.
or I'd be like, okay, I'll get up and sing for you. Here's my fee. Are you all going to contribute? I'll pitch in $5-10. Yeah, maybe then you could afford me, you know. Um,
Or you could also, you know, if you have the family where you could do this, you could also always, you know, in the spirit of like, you know, how you were saying, you know, make a joke back. You could always be like, well, if you want me to sing, why don't we all sing some Christmas carols? I'll lead you in Christmas carols, but you have to sing too, you know. You could always go that route as well. And if it's successful, you might have just made a new Christmas tradition that everyone actually really likes and gotten yourself out of future performing.
Very true. Yeah, it's a tricky one. All of these family relationships um, can really come to a head during the holidays. And again, just contribute to this kind of overall sense of loneliness around this time, which is just really hard.
Yeah. Hopefully you don't have to deal with that. Hopefully you have an understanding family, but for those of you who may not, um, you know, it's hard. It's hard. This is there's a lot of tension, I think, in the holiday season, especially as you grow up. I feel like, you know, as like kids, we look at, you know, the holidays with um through kind of like a magical lens, you know,
Mm-hmm.
which is great. But as we grow up and we grow older and come into our own, I feel like there can be a lot of tension during the holiday season
Mm-hmm.
in general. And it can be difficult to navigate that sometimes. So I think it's always important to, you know, first and foremost, just rely on God's grace and just, you know, just ask Him for the grace to navigate the tension, to navigate feelings of loneliness, feelings of burnout, difficult family situations, whatever it may be. And that's like I think the number one and one of the best things that we can do first and foremost is just to, you know, go right to God, ask Him for the grace. You know, the season is to celebrate Him and to celebrate His coming. Um, and you know, one of the things about Advent is that we're anticipating Christ's coming in multiple ways. It's not just, you know, like a reenactment of a historical event, but it's also a very real um, anticipation of Christ coming into our hearts, you know, making room for Him in our hearts. And um, I think it's just good to remember that he wants to be there, with us. And that actually also is like a really good antidote to the loneliness we've been talking about is, leaning into God's grace and mercy and love and just inviting him in, just continually inviting him in. Whenever we feel these feelings, I think that is an understated but very powerful tool that we can rely on during this time.
Absolutely. Yeah. Priest actually just earlier today said something to me that really stuck with me. I was kind of talking to him about the struggle of like total abandonment to God and to his providence and totally trusting in him, especially when you're facing a difficult situation or a hard time, or you're feeling really lonely, struggling with your relationships with your family or your colleagues, whatever it might be. And he said something, I'd never heard this before and I'd never really considered this. He said, you know, we so often talk about this radical faith in God and just placing all of our trust in him. And that is really important, but it's really hard to do. And he said, have you ever stopped to consider the fact that God has placed his trust and his faith in you? And he's given you all of these unique gifts and unique talents and unique circumstances and perspectives that belong just to you. And he trusts and has faith that you will use those gifts to contribute to your little world.
Hmm.
And he said, the more you can reflect on and think about the fact that God truly and intimately trusts you to become the person he's created you to be, your faith in God will grow out of that.
Hmm.
And I thought that was really profound and really beautiful. And also for me, a great reminder when we're talking about loneliness, particularly, that none of us are ever truly alone in anything that we go through. Jesus is always there in the deep with us, experiencing what we are experiencing, weeping with us when we weep, and leaning into that relationship of mutual trust between yourself and God can really carry you through a lot. At the same time, I also think it's important to recognize that you are not the only human being who feels this way either.
Oh yeah,
And,
for sure.
if you have musician friends or other friends like who work in healthcare, for example, who, they also have odd hours that they can't necessarily get time off, or, anybody else who you might know in a similar position, I would really encourage you to reach out to them if you're feeling this way. And you don't even necessarily have to confide in them about the state of your heart or how you're feeling, but like maybe just ask if they want to FaceTime or if they want to exchange voice notes about life and work, or even just have a text conversation about like, how's life, what's going on, what you been up to. And sometimes those just very simple interactions can be really healing for our hearts, especially if we are really struggling with something like loneliness. So in addition to, really relying on God and his grace that he gives us in these situations, I would also encourage you to rely on the people that he has given you in your life, whoever that may be, whatever that might look like. And again, even if it's just a very simple interaction, sometimes that can be so much more healing than we expect.
Mm-hmm. 100%. I think that's really good advice. There's such a heavy emphasis in the Christmas season, particularly about connectedness and, um, shared bonds and that sort of stuff. That, you know, this is a good thing. We live in an era that is very disconnected from each other. So, I say the more the more connectedness, the better. The more emphasis on that, the better. And we need to lean into that too, even especially if we're feeling those feelings of loneliness. Like we need to lean into seeking connections, not always waiting for that to come to us first. I think it can be very easy, especially maybe if you're like introverted like me, to like wait for people to come to you. But it's good for us to get outside of ourselves and go to others. We're meant to be the hands and feet of Christ, and um, this is a really good season in which we can do that in little ways, even when we're so busy, with our own schedules and whatnot. I think we can still look to see even just how we can be the hands and feet of Christ to the other musicians who we are rehearsing and performing with, that can go a long way. I like what you were saying about, reaching out to, people who are in fields where their schedules are also can be erratic and they have to work on the holidays, like healthcare. Like my father-in-law was a firefighter and he was not always able to be home for the holidays. He had to work some of them. Reaching out to people in similar circumstances and even just a quick text of just like, hey, how are you doing, can go a long way. Just knowing that someone else is like thinking about you, that can be just so good. So they don't have to be these great big ways of, these grand gestures and, big things. They can be simple, they can be little. Things don't have to be big for them to be meaningful.
Definitely. I can give a bit of a personal example anyway. Like loneliness actually is something that has been a huge, huge struggle for both my husband and myself living in Ireland, even though I've lived here for 5 years. It's for a myriad of reasons, some of them cultural, some of them social and societal, just for a lot of reasons. It's been really, really lonely here at times. And there have been times we've gone through where it's nearly been crushing how lonely it feels. And just last night, we were actually having a conversation about what we're going to be doing in the next couple weeks and months, just with our schedules. And we both kind of agreed that one thing we really want to try and do more is solidify more of the friendships that we do have here in Ireland by really making an effort to extend invitations to other people rather than like waiting for invitations to come to us. And it's a bit difficult like for us to do that purely because we live in a very small apartment. So like hanging out in our apartment with more than like two other people is really not possible. Like we can't fit those people.
Right.
But we talked about, okay, how can we get outside of ourselves and extend invitations to other people to come and get to know us better? And that is ultimately going to make us feel less lonely in an otherwise like sometimes fairly lonely environment.
Yeah.
And I think what you were saying there, Cecilia, about like extending invitations to other people really is so important, because I think sometimes one of the hardest parts about feeling lonely is that it can make you so self-pitying, and it can make you really just want to wallow in your own misery. I totally understand it, and I fall victim to that myself sometimes, because it is really difficult to kind of dig yourself out of that. However, I have really found that the more I make an effort to think of other people before myself and put other people's, physical and emotional needs before my own, within reason, the easier it has become for me to alleviate this burden of loneliness on myself. And I know there's some psychology, there's like studies have been done about how like thinking about other people and doing things for other people is actually so good for your own well-being. And like, what better time to be giving to others than Christmas? What better time to be generous with your time, with your finances, if you're able, with your talents. Um, and the more that we can really get outside of ourselves and like not even give ourselves the opportunity or the time to wallow in our own misery, we will feel so much better. And it will be so much easier to alleviate this burden of loneliness for ourselves and for other people. And like, I don't know where all of our listeners are living, but at least here, part of the difficulty is it is oppressively dark and wet in Dublin in the winter. And so motivating yourself to like get up and go out is so difficult. Even just last night, um, one of my friends had a service in town, 7 p.m. on a Friday, and there was an orange warning storm hitting Dublin at that time, where it was like gale force winds, like actually literally blowing people over on the street, and it like
Oh my gosh.
pouring rain the whole time. It was very
Crazy.
bad weather. But she decided not to cancel this performance. And she had mentioned to me that, she was hoping to exceed last year's numbers initially, but of course the storm was likely going to impact the number of people that were able to go and able to attend. And so I committed to myself that I was going to go to this event, even though it was a miserable evening outside and I had gotten off of quite a long and difficult day at work, and I hadn't yet seen my husband that day. Um, and I was so glad that I made that commitment and forced myself out of my comfort zone to go and support my friend. It ended up being such a beautiful service. It was for the month of November in remembrance of the faithful departed, and it was
Oh,
beautiful. It was so wonderful. And I ended up seeing so many people there afterwards who I forgot were going to be there, who,
aw.
many of whom I hadn't talked to in a long time. And so even though I went in feeling kind of sorry for myself because I was wet and I was cold and I was miserable from work, um, it was so beautiful and so grace filled. And I feel like God really taught me something in that opportunity, that like the more you can push beyond your own limitations and really get outside yourself, like he can work in those circumstances and he will bring so much beauty and so much grace out of those small opportunities that you give him to work in your life. So again, like just an encouragement to really reach outside of yourself, step beyond your comfort zone, and make these opportunities to reach out to people in your life. And like it's so meaningful. I can't even express properly in words how beautiful and profound and important and good it is to just take a little bit of time, a little bit of effort to improve someone else's day.
Amen to that. Amen to that. Well, on that note, I think that's a good place to wrap up this episode. We hope that this has been helpful to at least someone out there. And on that note, Tara, what have you been listening to?
My recommendation today is actually from a video game soundtrack. I
Hmm.
think it was recently released. I don't play this game, but my husband plays this game. And he sent me this song and was like, you should listen to this. And now I'm going to recommend that all of you listen to it because it's very good. The video game that it's from is called Europa Universalis 5. So it's like a history game. Don't really know much about it. Can't tell you anything about the game. But um, the soundtrack is actually really good in general. Very, very good, very well written, really interesting pieces. And the composer, hope I don't butcher this name. Håkan Glänte is the composer. And I will particularly today draw your attention to his Lux Aeterna that he wrote for this
Ooh.
video game. It's beautiful. It is just lovely. It's a really lovely, easy listening piece of music. It's excellent. So that is going to be my recommendation of the week. And if you're a video game person, go check out the video game. Seems really cool from what I know about it. I just am not into like video games myself. But the whole soundtrack, from everything I've heard, is really excellent. But Lux Aeterna especially. give it a listen.
Love that. Well, I would like to say that I've continued on my streak of not listening to any Christmas-related music, including the Nutcracker, but that is a lie because I caved about 2 days ago and listened to the Nutcracker.
Oh
And for
no.
me, I don't know about anybody else out there listening, but the Nutcracker is like a gateway drug to other Christmas music, so I fully anticipate to have Christmas music on in my house probably sometime next week. Although I am trying to hold out for the day after Thanksgiving. We'll see. We'll see what happens. I really am trying to hold on to like the last bit of fall, you know what I mean? But with that being said, last week we went out and got some more Christmas decor to like fill out some spaces in our house that, we didn't have Christmas decor for. And I don't know, I'm looking up Christmas cookie recipes and I'm just starting to feel the itch to, make gingerbread and listen to the King Singers and their lovely Christmas album, but I'm not going to yet. So I listened to the Nutcracker and that's going to be my thing for the week. I do like the fact that the Nutcracker isn't technically Christmas music, but it feels Christmassy. And I try to live within the liturgical seasons as much as possible, which is why I try to be more of a stickler with myself about not listening to Christmas music until at least the day after Thanksgiving. But sometimes you just want a little bit of festive cheer in the middle of November. November can be a very gloomy month. Now, it is not a gloomy month down here in Southwest Florida. It actually is quite a nice month in Southwest Florida. The temperatures are actually bearable again, which is phenomenal. But I don't know what it is about November. Even being down here, there just seems to be something about November that feels heavier than other months. I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is. So while it might not be gloomy down here, that just feels a little bit heavier than other months. So I like putting on the Nutcracker in November at some point in November because it just lightens that just a little bit. So also the Dance of the Chocolates is just so fun. I always forget how much I love that one until I listen to it, in November before Christmas every year. And I'm like, yes, oh my gosh, I love the music for this. This is just so fun. So fun. So anyway, that's my thing for the week, the Nutcracker. And next week, you probably can expect me to have listened to Christmas music. Tune in next week to find out whether or not Cecilia has listened to Christmas music yet. Anyway.
Hold out, Cecilia. You could do it. Hold out. Thanksgiving isn't that far. Thanksgiving is not that far away. It really isn't.
Oh my gosh, I was looking at the calendar and I was like, holy cannoli, it's like a week and a half away, basically, at this point.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah. So crazy.
And on that note, thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the Little Sparks podcast. We hope you'll join us again next week, and God bless.
God bless.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Little Sparks podcast. For more information on this podcast and our ministry, please visit www.thehildegardcollective.com.